Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at a 2021 action film called Sweet Girl. The movie starts with the first scene where we witness a high-end police chase. The chopper's up in the sky and locating a suspect. The camera then pans towards the protagonist who's standing at the edge of a roof. As the police chopper gets him in the spotlight, the FBI also arrives on scene. One of the officers asks him to stop now that it's over, but the guy, named Ray, says that it wasn't supposed to be like this. With that, he turns around and runs to jump off the edge, hundreds of feet down in the water. The scenario shifts back to many years where we see Ray traveling in the woods with his wife and daughter. They travel through the glorious forest and camp at a riverside where their daughter, Rachel, sleeps in her mother's arms while Ray looks affectionately at his wife, Amanda. As she sings Rachel to sleep, she asks Ray, "What are you looking at, man?" To which Ray replies, "I'm looking at you, woman." As their flamboyant memories are created, a sad turn takes place and Amanda is suddenly diagnosed with cancer, once again, and shifted to the hospital. The doctor recommends a drug called Infirmam, but seems like the family has leveraged out of everything and they can't afford it. Time passes and everyone celebrates Rachel's birthday, upon which Amanda presents Rachel with a stuffed bunny named Paloma. We then see Ray and Rachel practicing in the boxing ring where she skillfully tackles her father. Later at the hospital, the doctor gives good news to them that a new drug called Sparrow is almost approved by the FDA. It has the same generic effects as Infirmam but is relatively economical. Ray rejoices with Rachel at the good news. We then see that the new medication hasn't started, and upon inquiring, the doctor tells them that it has been pulled from the market. The Infirmam company Bioprime has paid to delay the drug release indefinitely. Later, an interview of Bioprime CEO is taking place on the TV where he argues with the politician about the costs and expensive treatment of cancer. Ray calls the show and addresses the CEO, Simon Keeley, and states that due to his business strategy, his wife is in danger. With that, Ray threatens to kill him if Amanda dies. Afterwards, they both sit beside Amanda, who asks Ray, "What are you looking at, man?" Tearful and broken, he replies, "I'm looking at you, woman." With that, Rachel starts to hum a song to her. But alas, it doesn't do any good as Amanda's soul departs and the tragedy hits them harshly. Ray leaves the room and walks madly in the corridors and ends up crying uncontrollably. 6 months later, we see him boxing once again in the gym with his heart still heavy. Afterwards, he returns home where the due bills are waiting for him. Rachel says to ignore it, and as they playfully tease each other, Ray gets a call. It's a guy named Martin Bennett, who's a journalist for Vice. He states that he's going against Bioprime and other big parties involved in bribes, and the story of Amanda's death will be helpful. For this purpose, he asks Ray to meet him in 20 minutes. Ray advises Rachel strictly to stay inside and goes to the subway where Martin calls him to board the train. Suddenly, we see Rachel following him and she enters the cabin as well. They get off the next stop and go around the station to board another train, where Ray finally meets Martin. As he states all his credentials, Martin tells him about the bribes and offshore accounts that Simon Keeley owns, and with Ray's story and help, it'll be possible to put him and other powerful people away for good. Ray asks for a moment to decide, while Rachel tries to listen to the conversation. In the meantime, as they talk, a man suddenly appears and stabs Martin in the chest and murders him. Afterwards, the fight shifts to Ray, where the man attacks him repeatedly. As Rachel watches in fright, Ray lands a few blows on him and smashes him into the window, but the guy manages to hit him back. To play her part, Rachel jumps in as well, but the hitman just throws her out of the door as the train stops. Ray gets up, lands a blow on the hitman, and goes out to check on Rachel, but the guy attacks him again and stabs him in the side. Afterward, he throws Ray out the window as the train leaves. As he lays on the platform, his eyes meet Rachel's and ultimately they both fade out. 2 years later, we see Rachel boxing viciously in the ring. She uses all her strength to fight the opponent and almost chokes him even when he's tapping. Her loss of self-control is clearly visible. Later, we see the politician Diana Morgan creating a bipartisan bill and agreement with Bioprime, with Simon Keeley and the chairman, Vinod Shah, at her side. Rachel wakes up and discusses Amanda with Ray. Meanwhile, he goes to the side where a whole research is plastered on the wall. His eyes focus on the UNICEF charity auction where Simon Keeley is the keynote speaker. That night, as honorable guests approach the auction, Ray also parks his car on a side. He enters the building from the back door and steals a caterer's uniform. In the meantime, Simon is invited to the stage for a speech, whereas Ray puts an out-of-order card in the men's room. As Simon ends the speech, Ray arrives in the main hall. He witnesses Simon sitting at a table, so he picks up a scotch glass and in a swift motion drops it on him and walks away immediately. Simon is exasperated and he accompanies his guards to the men's room where the lookout guard gets sprayed and taken out by a fire extinguisher. Ray breaks the door and puts a knife to Simon's throat. He tells him that he was warned about Amanda's death and inquires about the ordered hit on Martin Bennett. Simon tries to evade the question, but upon intimidation, he gives him the name of Vinod Shah. As they're talking, Simon's guard attacks Ray and they indulge in a fight. He manages to fight both of them off and he makes Simon shoot his own guard. Afterwards, both of them struggle to reach for the gun, but Ray finally manages to kill Simon with a plastic bag wrapped around his face. Later, he returns home and immediately asks Rachel to pack up all the things while telling them he had no choice but to kill them. Back at the crime scene, the FBI interrogates the guard who tells them about the overheard conversation about a woman and the death threat. The agent, named Sarah Meeker, orders a pullout on all the death threats given to Simon Keeley. In the meantime, Ray and Rachel drive along the snowy back roads leading to Toronto, whereas the agents finally get a match and get to know about Ray Cooper, who gave the death threat to Simon Keeley on the live show. Moreover, they found Ray's vehicle leaving the crime scene as well. Sarah immediately asks to put an ABP on Ray's car. Later, we see Ray crossing the toll booth and his info is passed on to two mercenaries. Ray and Rachel make it to a motel, and as he takes out the stuff from his car, Ray sends his daughter upstairs. Instead of going into the room, Rachel calls Sarah from a PCO and tells her everything, that her father is totally innocent and that there's been a mistake. Sarah provides her with her personal number and asks Rachel to contact her via burner phone. But just as she asks for her location, Rachel cuts the phone. In the meantime, Ray enters the hall and puts a jingle belt on the entrance door. Afterwards, he enters the room where Rachel is still cross with him for being so ruthless. The scene then shifts to the soldiers entering the motel. As they cross the main door, the bell jingles and Ray wakes up. He takes Rachel and sneaks out of the hall and waits at the end. The gunman comes around the corner and Ray fights him as they fall down the stairs. Ultimately, he manages to choke the mercenary and proceeds to fight the other one. Ray takes out an axe and runs to the bedroom where the soldier follows him. Inside, Ray hides in the cabinet, and just as the mercenary arrives, he attacks him and they both drop out the window and crash land on a car. Ray struggles to fight him and ultimately shoots him with his own pistol. He then looks up to find Rachel staring at him in extreme disbelief. He quickly stands up, grabs the pistol with extra magazines, and they flee the scene. Back at their own apartment, the FBI breaks in and finds all the related data for Ray to be the prime suspect. Suddenly, Sarah gets a call about the double homicide and Ray's vehicle escaping the motel. In the interim, we see that Rachel is upset with Ray, but he still tries to make it up to her. The movie then flips to the hitman from the subway, who's looking at the van. The owner of the car lot welcomes him, but the hitman murders him, steals a shotgun, and takes the van away. Meanwhile, Ray travels across the snowy roads, but due to the danger, they go off-road. Ray parks the car and walks out to check the mercenary's phone. He finds it filled with Vinod Shah's calls, and suddenly he catches the news that Shah just bought a mansion outside Pittsburgh. Later we see him cutting a tree along a bridge and closing the tunnel with a barrier. Afterwards he practices the gunshots in the woods, but turns out that he's a noob. In the meantime, Rachel calls Sarah and tells her that Ray's out of control. She talks to her about the stuffed bunny, Paloma, and Sarah reassures her that she's the one in control. Later, they argue as Rachel insists on accompanying him to the mission. At last, Ray gives in and agrees to take her. Meanwhile, we see the hitman preparing bombshells for the shotgun. He walks outside and fires to find them highly explosive. The night falls in as Ray and Rachel wait outside Shah's mansion. Just in that time, the hitman's van passes them and Shah is seen leaving the house. Ray drives on while these SUVs come behind him and one of them gets a flat tire as Ray throws iron screws on the road. One car down and the rest proceed. In the interim, Ray stops at the tunnel to move the barrier and afterwards parks the car in the dark. As Shah's vehicles enter the tunnel, they find it blocked by a tree. Shah immediately orders to retreat, but the rear SUV gets rammed by a huge bulldozer. Ray walks outside while Shah's SUV races forward again, but gets stuck at the fallen tree. In the meantime, the hitman also arrives from the other side of the bridge and shoots the stuck SUV. Shah escapes while the hitman bursts the car into flames. On the other hand, Ray advises Rachel to stay in the car and grapples with Shah and inquires him about the main conspirator. Shah laughs and doesn't tell him anything but suddenly gets shot by the hitman. Ray flees the scene while the hitman chases them and manages to burst the car's rear tire. Midway, they leave the car and walk through the woods until they come to a station where they steal the tow truck and drive away. Upon passing a cafe, Rachel spots the van parked outside. They park the truck across the road and walk inside where Ray sits beside the hitman who talks to him. After a discussion, he gets to know that it's Diana Morgan who hired him to take out all the competitors, and it is she who's the main culprit behind everything. Afterwards, as they leave, the hitman addresses Rachel and that he'll see her soon. The following morning, they leave in the tow truck while Sarah contemplates over Rachel's condition in the FBI headquarters. Suddenly, they get a report of the stolen tow truck and Sarah requests to keep an eye on the cameras. Later that night, they receive the update that the tow truck is spotted entering the city. All of the police forces enter the chase and follow that truck while they swerve through the streets to reach a traffic jam at the bridge. Ray leaves the car and escapes on foot while the FBI chases him. He enters the stadium, and the scene from the start replays where the agents follow him to the edge of the roof. Ray stands there and Sarah requests him to back off. Suddenly, the biggest plot twist hits us as we get to know that Ray actually died on the subway, and it was Rachel all along who did everything. She was the one who killed Simon, fought the mercenaries, trapped Vinod, talked with the hitman, and now she is here. As Sarah tries to stop her, Rachel takes the leap down into the water. Later, she's rescued by the forces and taken in an ambulance, but she wakes up and attacks the agents. Ultimately, the ambulance crashes, and she escapes to lie on a bench where Ray appears and consoles her. Later, she goes to Diana's speech and inspects her, while the hitman also arrives there. Afterwards, Diana goes to the Congress Hall, and Rachel also manages to sneak in. While she's in there, memories of Ray flood her mind as she takes out his jacket and wears it while continuing towards Diana's office. As she enters it, the hitman also arrives and attacks her. She gets thrown outside while the hitman walks around the hall to look for her. Outside, they finally meet where a savage fight breaks in between them. The hitman pulls her down and tries to drown her in the fountain, but just as she's losing her breath, Ray's voice echoes in her mind and he urges her to be strong. He calls her his sweet girl, and with a surge of power, she overcomes the hitman and stabs him multiple times until his blood fills up the fountain. In pure anger, she moves back to Diana's office and threatens her and manages to make her confess every bribe and planning she did with Bioprime. Afterwards, instead of killing her, Rachel leaves, and it turns out she recorded everything on her phone. The FBI receives the confession recording, and Diana is finally arrested for her treacherous acts. Rachel finds utter peace in her mind, and the movie comes to an end as she finally and safely flies away to another city. Drop a comment below letting me know how you found the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Thanks for watching, guys!